Kate wears Diana's ring every single day. She's worn the lover's knot tiara to more than a dozen state banquets since 2015. The sapphire earrings, the pearl drops, the three-strand bracelet, she's brought them all out again and again at events where the whole world is watching. Kate has made honoring Diana's jewelry legacy a visible, consistent part of how she presents herself to the public. And yet, there's one piece, arguably Diana's most iconic piece, the one fashion historians call Diana's armor. The seven-strand pearl choker with that massive sapphire centerpiece that Diana once wore as a headband to a Melbourne gala and made international headlines. That piece hasn't been seen in public since 1996. Nearly 3 decades. Gone. The internet has theories. Oh, does the internet have theories? Threads on royal gossip forums have reportedly generated thousands of comments arguing about where this choker went and who's keeping it locked away. The narratives fall into predictable camps. There's the dusty vault conspiracy. The idea that some vindictive palace bureaucrat locked Diana's most powerful piece in a climate-controlled basement the moment she died and threw away the key. There's the Camilla vendetta theory, which holds that the current queen simply cannot tolerate seeing Diana's signature jewelry in public and has quietly ensured it stays hidden. There's the Spencer family standoff narrative, claiming that Diana's brother Charles has the choker at Althorp and refuses to loan it back to the Windsors out of family pride or lingering resentment. The language in these forums is revealing. People don't just want to see the choker again, they feel entitled to see it. Comments describe the piece as Diana's legacy being erased. They accuse the palace of hoarding or hiding. They frame Kate's non-use of the choker as a personal failing, evidence that she doesn't really want to honor Diana, that she's complicit in some institutional cover-up. One viral post reportedly claimed that the choker was deliberately buried because it represented everything Diana stood for that the royal family wanted forgotten. The emotional investment is intense, and understandable, honestly. Diana meant something to people. Her jewelry, especially this piece, became a visual shorthand for her independence, her refusal to disappear quietly, her insistence on being seen on her own terms. When that jewelry vanishes, it feels like something is being taken away. But here's the thing. The real answer is way more complicated than any conspiracy. And honestly, it's more interesting too, because it involves outdated palace protocols that most people have never heard of, a legal will that almost nobody has read carefully, and the deeply personal choices of 2 boys who lost their mother before they were old enough to fully understand what was happening. So let's talk about what's actually going on. First, we need to understand the piece itself. What makes this particular choker matter more than the dozens of other stunning pieces Diana owned? The sapphire and pearl choker measures about 2 inches in height when worn. It sits high on the neck in the Victorian style, creating this distinctive silhouette that photographers in the 80s and 90s learned to capture from very specific angles. The centerpiece is a large oval cabochon sapphire, salon, estimated somewhere between 8 and 12 carats, surrounded by 2 rows of diamonds, about 40 stones total. Then there are the 7 strands of cultured pearls fanning out from that central ornament. It's beautiful, obviously. But beautiful jewelry is everywhere in royal collections. What makes this piece different is its origin story. That sapphire centerpiece? It started life as a brooch. A perfectly traditional, perfectly respectable brooch from the personal collection of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. She gave it to Diana as a wedding gift in July 1981. A personal gift rather than a loan from any institutional collection. Diana married Charles on July 29th at St. Paul's Cathedral, walking down the aisle in that ivory silk taffeta gown designed by David and Elizabeth Emanuel. And among the mountain of wedding gifts was this brooch from her husband's grandmother. For a couple of years, Diana did what you'd expect. She pinned the brooch to dress bodices. She wore it on jacket lapels at formal engagements. It was pretty. It was appropriate. It looked exactly like what it was. A nice gift from her husband's grandmother that she dutifully displayed at public functions. But Diana wasn't interested in looking like everyone expected her to look. By 1984, she'd developed working relationships with London jewelers who could help her reimagine pieces from her growing collection. And at some point, she made a decision that changed everything. She commissioned someone to take that Queen Mother brooch, that traditional, safe, conventional piece of jewelry, and transform it into something entirely different. She added the 7 strands of pearls. She turned a brooch into a choker. This wasn't just customization. This was creative reinvention. Diana took something Charles's grandmother gave her and made it unmistakably, irreversibly her own. The technical challenge of this transformation deserves more attention than it usually gets. Anyone who works with antique jewelry will tell you that converting a brooch into a completely different piece is risky business. You're dealing with settings that were designed for a specific purpose, metal that may have been stressed or weakened over decades, stones that could crack or chip if handled incorrectly. Victorian brooches are designed to be pinned to fabric. They have a specific weight distribution, a clasp mechanism built into the back, a center of gravity that assumes the piece will hang from a single point of attachment. Converting that into a choker requires completely reimagining how the piece functions structurally. The jeweler had to create a new mounting system that could support the brooch's weight while distributing it evenly across 7 strands of pearls. The clasp mechanism had to be repositioned or replaced entirely. The back of the piece, never meant to be visible, had to be finished to rest comfortably against skin rather than fabric. The sapphire itself presented particular challenges. Cabochon-cut stones, those smooth, domed gems rather than faceted ones, are actually more vulnerable to damage during reworking than you might expect. The curved surface can hide internal fractures that only reveal themselves under stress. Drilling new mounting holes near an existing setting risks cracking the surrounding metal or loosening the stone. Every modification carries the possibility of catastrophic failure. And then there's the engineering of the pearl strands themselves. 7 strands, graduated in length to create that distinctive cascading effect, each strand individually knotted between pearls. That knotting is standard practice to prevent catastrophic loss if a strand breaks. If one knot fails, you lose 1 pearl, not the entire strand. But it also means threading, knotting, measuring, adjusting, rethreading. Multiply that by 7 strands, all meeting at 2 separate anchor points that connect to the central sapphire mounting. This is precision work, the kind of commission that takes weeks of planning before anyone touches a tool. Diana paid for all of it herself, out of her own funds, which is how the piece became unambiguously her personal property rather than a modified loan. And then came Melbourne. October 31st, 1985, the Southern Cross Hotel in Melbourne, Australia. Diana and Charles were on an official tour, and the evening's event was a formal gala dinner. Diana wore a gown designed by the Emanuels, the same team who'd made her wedding dress. Here's where it gets good. Instead of wearing her newly completed sapphire choker around her neck, where chokers traditionally go, Diana positioned the piece across her forehead. The sapphire sat centered above her brow. The pearl strands swept back through her hair like an Art Deco headband. The visual effect was stunning and completely unprecedented for a member of the royal family at an official function. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't Diana making a last-minute wardrobe call in her hotel room. Contemporary accounts confirm that the piece required modification to sit securely on the forehead, hair combs or pins to anchor the pearl strands at the back of the head. She'd planned this, practiced this. She walked into that Melbourne ballroom knowing exactly what she was doing. Think about what that means for a second. Diana took a piece of jewelry that was already a transformation, a brooch converted to a choker, and transformed it again. She rejected both the original function and the modified function, creating a third use that nobody had anticipated. The Queen Mother's brooch became Diana's choker, became Diana's headband. Each iteration moved further from tradition, further from expectation, further from the safe and appropriate thing a princess was supposed to do. The Times of London reported the next day that Diana had reinterpreted the choker in a manner that defied convention. The Melbourne Age gave it front-page coverage. Fashion editors around the world scrambled to analyze what it meant. Was it rebellion? Was it a statement? Was it just a young woman having fun with her accessories? Whatever the intent, the effect was undeniable. Diana had taken jewelry that could have been safely conventional and made it impossible to ignore. From that night forward, the sapphire choker became Diana's signature piece. Fashion archivists have documented approximately 40 public appearances over the next decade: state dinners at Buckingham Palace, the 1985 White House dinner where she danced with John Travolta, charity galas in London and abroad, film premieres and diplomatic receptions. She developed consistent styling patterns, off-shoulder or one-shoulder gowns in blue, white, or black. When the choker appeared, it meant Diana was performing at the highest level of royal spectacle. But the piece carried something else, too, something harder to define. Fashion historians and Diana biographers have noted that she often chose to wear it during periods of marital difficulty. The tight fit around the neck, the dramatic visual weight, the memory of that rebellious Melbourne moment, all of it combined to create what commentators started calling Diana's armor. When she wore it, she wasn't just attending an event, she was going into battle. The years between 1992 and 1996 were particularly significant for the choker's symbolic weight. This was the period when Diana's marriage publicly disintegrated, the separation announced in December 1992, the famous panorama interview in November 1995, the divorce finalized in August 1996. These were years when Diana was most visibly fighting the institution she'd married into, when every public appearance carried subtext about power, image, and control. Let me walk you through a few specific moments. June 1994. Diana attended a gala dinner at the Serpentine Gallery in London. This was during the period when Andrew Morton's book had already exposed the depth of her unhappiness, when everyone knew the marriage was over in all but legal formality. Charles was giving a televised interview that same week in which he would admit to adultery. Diana knew this was coming. She knew the press would be watching to see how she responded. She chose the sapphire choker, paired it with a form-fitting off-shoulder black dress, arrived alone. The photographs from that night show a woman who understood exactly how images work, the choker catching the camera flash, the dark fabric making her skin glow, her expression composed but unreadable. The next day's papers weren't talking about Charles's interview. They were talking about Diana's dress, Diana's jewelry, Diana's presence. She had redirected the entire news cycle with a single appearance. That wasn't an accident. That was strategy. A state banquet in late 1995 offers another example. By this point, Diana had given her explosive panorama interview, revealing details about her marriage, her struggles with bulimia, her feelings about Camilla. The establishment was furious. There was real discussion about stripping her of her royal title, and yet she was still required to attend official functions alongside Charles, to perform the role of princess, even as the marriage was formally dissolving. At that particular banquet, Diana wore the choker with a pale blue Catherine Walker gown. Charles was present, so was the Queen. The visual dynamic was extraordinary. Diana in her armor, positioned near but separate from her husband, making small talk with diplomats while wearing the most photographed piece of jewelry she owned. Reporters noted that she touched the choker repeatedly during the evening, adjusting it, drawing attention to it. Whether consciously or not, she was reminding everyone in that room, and everyone who would see the photographs, of who she was and what she represented. The press coverage focused almost entirely on Diana, what she wore, how she looked, whether she seemed happy or sad. Charles was an afterthought in his own story. That's what the choker did. It commanded attention. It announced that Diana refused to be diminished or forgotten or pushed into the background. In rooms full of people who might have preferred she quietly disappear, she wore the most dramatic piece she owned and dared anyone to look away. Charles and Diana's divorce was finalized on August 28, 1996. The settlement included provisions that distinguished between pieces belonging to the crown and pieces that were Diana's personal property. Crown pieces, including tiaras and jewels she'd worn on loan during her marriage, went back to the palace. Personal pieces that Diana owned outright stayed with her. The sapphire choker was unambiguously personal property. The original brooch had been a gift, not a loan. Diana had commissioned and paid for its transformation. The piece was hers, legally and absolutely. When she left Kensington Palace after the divorce, the choker left with her. The final confirmed public appearance was in 1996. The exact date and event are disputed among royal fashion archivists. What's certain is that after the divorce was finalized, Diana's signature piece essentially vanished. She continued attending high-profile events until her death the following year, but her armor stayed home. Now, here's where everything changes. Here's the part that blows up every conspiracy theory about palace hoarding or institutional cruelty. Diana died in Paris on August 31st, 1997. She was 36. Her sons, William and Harry, were 15 and 12. Her death was sudden, violent, completely unexpected, which meant that the legal documents she'd prepared years earlier suddenly became operative in circumstances nobody had anticipated. Specifically, her 1993 will, modified by a codicil. Clause 5. Clause 5 bequeathed Diana's personal jewelry, including the sapphire choker, to her sons. The jewelry was to be held in trust until they married or reached 30, at which point they'd receive their inheritance. Read that again. The choker does not belong to the Spencer family. It does not belong to the crown. It doesn't belong to King Charles or Queen Camilla or any institutional royal collection. It belongs to William and Harry. The trust timeline matters here. William turned 30 on June 21st, 2012. He had married Kate in April 2011, so he'd already met the marriage condition before reaching 30. Harry turned 30 on September 15th, 2014, and married Meghan in May 2018. By the mid-2000s, at the latest, both brothers had full legal control over their inheritance from Diana. The trust had dissolved. The jewelry was theirs, to divide as they saw fit, to keep, to loan, to do whatever they wanted with. This completely reframes the mystery. The piece isn't locked in some Spencer family vault beyond Windsor's reach. It isn't being hoarded by palace bureaucracy. It's in the possession of Diana's sons, who have chosen, for reasons that are entirely theirs to have, not to see it worn publicly. Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, has been a prominent guardian of Diana's broader legacy. He maintains the memorial exhibition at Althorp House. He speaks publicly about his sister. But he doesn't own her personal jewelry. Her sons do. The palace can't release the choker because the palace doesn't have it. But to fully understand why Diana-associated jewelry works the way it does, we need to talk about Queen Elizabeth's system. because that system created patterns and expectations that still influence everything. And it explains why people jump to conspiracy theories in the first place. Elizabeth ran what you might call an exclusive assignment structure. Pieces from the Crown collection and her personal collection got allocated to specific individuals, and once assigned, those pieces generally stayed with that person for life. Think of it like a permanent loan rather than a rotating schedule. This system had benefits. It meant senior royals could build genuine relationships with specific pieces, wearing them repeatedly until they became associated with that person's identity. The Queen herself wore certain brooches so consistently that royal watchers could decode her moods based on which one she chose for a given engagement. But the system also had a devastating flaw. It couldn't handle death gracefully. When someone with assigned jewelry died, those pieces entered a kind of purgatory, technically available, emotionally untouchable. The longer they sat unused, the more charged any reappearance became. The Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara is the perfect example of how this worked, and how it failed. The tiara was made for Queen Mary in 1914. It eventually passed to Elizabeth's collection. After Diana's 1981 wedding, the tiara was assigned to Diana, who wore it so frequently it became synonymous with her in the public imagination. When Diana divorced in 1996, the tiara returned to the Crown collection because it was Crown property. But under Elizabeth's system, it then entered limbo, no longer assigned to Diana, not yet reassigned to anyone else, and carrying associations that made any reassignment emotionally complicated. The Lover's Knot tiara didn't appear publicly again until 2015, when Kate wore it to a diplomatic reception. That's an 18-year gap, nearly 2 decades where one of the most beautiful tiaras in the royal collection sat unused because Elizabeth's assignment system, combined with sensitivity about Diana's memory, essentially froze it in place. And this pattern wasn't unique to Diana. Consider what happened after the Queen Mother died in March 2002. She had amassed an enormous personal jewelry collection over her 101 years. Tiaras, necklaces, brooches, earrings, pieces inherited from Queen Alexandra, pieces given as wedding gifts, pieces collected over 7 decades as a senior royal. When she died, those pieces became available for redistribution. Some were absorbed into the Queen's collection and occasionally appeared on Elizabeth, but many simply vanished from public view. The Greville tiara, which the Queen Mother had worn regularly, wasn't seen again until Camilla began wearing it after her 2005 marriage to Charles. That's a 3-year gap for a stunning piece that had no tragic associations. It was simply frozen by institutional inertia. Princess Margaret's death, also in 2002, created similar complications. Margaret had been assigned several significant pieces over her lifetime, including brooches and necklaces from the Crown collection. After her death, some pieces returned to the vault and weren't redistributed for years. The Poltimore tiara, which Margaret had worn at her 1960 wedding, was eventually sold at auction in 2006, but only after sitting in limbo for 4 years while the family decided what to do with it. The pattern repeats throughout Elizabeth's reign. Pieces got assigned, people died, pieces got frozen, years passed. Eventually, sometimes, someone would quietly bring a piece back into circulation. But the default state was invisibility. This is the system that shaped expectations about Diana-associated jewelry for decades. It trained the public to interpret absence as intention, to assume that if something wasn't being worn, someone was deliberately hiding it. And in many cases, that assumption wasn't wrong. The system did hide things. It just hid them through bureaucratic paralysis rather than active malice. Kate has navigated this minefield with remarkable deliberateness. When her engagement to William was announced on November 16, 2010, she was wearing Diana's engagement ring. That 12-carat oval Ceylon sapphire surrounded by 14 diamonds that Diana had selected from the Gerard catalog back in 1981. The story of how that ring reached Kate's finger is more complicated than the fairy tale version suggests. Former royal butler Paul Burrell claimed that Harry had inherited the ring and gave it to William for the proposal, saying he wanted their mother to be part of the engagement. It's a beautiful story. It was repeated everywhere. But in his 2023 memoir, Spare, Harry offered a different account, suggesting William already had the ring. The conflicting narratives have never been fully resolved, and they probably don't need to be. What matters is the outcome. Kate wears that ring. She's worn it virtually every day since 2010. Thousands of public appearances over nearly 15 years. This isn't occasional tribute. This is constant tribute. Daily tribute. She's made Diana's most recognizable personal piece part of her permanent presentation as a member of the royal family. Beyond the ring, she's worn Diana's sapphire and diamond earrings at a 2011 charity gala, Diana's Collingwood pearl drop earrings at the 2016 state opening of Parliament, Diana's three-strand pearl bracelet at engagements in 2012, 2017, and 2022. And the lover's knot tiara, Diana's signature formal headpiece, has become Kate's signature too. Worn at least a dozen times since 2015 at state banquets and diplomatic receptions. Kate hasn't avoided Diana's jewelry. She's actively incorporated it into her public role, consistently and deliberately for more than a decade. The pieces she hasn't worn are absent for reasons that have nothing to do with Kate's feelings about Diana. So what's the actual barrier to seeing the choker again? The honest answer is that we're looking at deeply personal decisions made by people processing profound loss. And those decisions don't have to make sense to outside observers. William was 15 when his mother died. Harry was 12. They grew up in a world where their mother's image, her jewelry, her clothing, her every public moment was analyzed and commodified and turned into tabloid content. The sapphire choker isn't just beautiful jewelry to them. It's their mother's armor, the piece she wore when she was fighting battles they were too young to fully understand. There are practical complications, too. When the jewelry was held in trust, decisions about its use could be made collectively or deferred indefinitely. Once both brothers married and the trust dissolved, by 2014 for certain, probably earlier for William, questions about which pieces belonged to whom became real and specific. Did they divide the collection? Does one brother have the choker? Does the other have different pieces? These are questions with answers that have never been made public, and honestly, they shouldn't be. They're private family matters. The fact that William and Harry's relationship has become publicly strained only adds complexity to something that was already emotionally fraught. Then there's the emotional weight of this specific piece. The sapphire choker wasn't just something Diana wore. It was something she wore during her transformation from fairy tale princess to independent woman. During the period when she was most visibly at war with the institution she'd married into. For Kate to wear that particular piece would invite intense comparison, analysis, and emotional projection from people with very strong feelings about Diana's legacy. That's a lot to ask of anyone, even someone as practiced at public life as Kate. But things are shifting, slowly. Queen Elizabeth died on September 8, 2022, ending a 70-year reign. Charles acceded immediately, with Camilla becoming queen consort. And the transition created an opportunity, maybe even an imperative, to reconsider how royal jewelry was managed. Here's where the story takes a turn that might surprise you. Camilla, the woman royal watchers have spent decades casting as the villain in Diana's story, appears to be quietly revolutionizing how jewelry circulates within the family. The old system, Elizabeth's rigid, exclusive assignment structure, kept pieces frozen in place for years, sometimes decades. What we're seeing under Camilla is different. In the official coronation portraits released after Charles's May 6, 2023 coronation, Kate wore the George VI festoon necklace, a Victorian piece with a cascade of diamonds in a garland pattern. It had been closely associated with Elizabeth for decades, the kind of piece that under the old system would have stayed in a vault for years, while everyone figured out the emotional politics of reassignment. Instead, Kate wore it within 8 months of Elizabeth's death, at the biggest royal milestone in 70 years. Then, in 2024, Camilla herself wore the festoon necklace to a state event. Think about what that means. The same piece, appearing on 2 different senior royals within a year of each other. Under Elizabeth's system, that kind of circulation simply didn't happen. Pieces were assigned, they stayed assigned. They didn't move around. Camilla isn't hoarding jewelry. She's doing the opposite. She's establishing a pattern where significant pieces can be shared, rotated, seen on different members of the family at different events. The old gatekeeping, whether it was deliberate policy or just institutional inertia, appears to be dissolving. This is actually a big deal for how we think about the monarchy's relationship with Diana's memory. For years, the narrative has been that the institution wanted to bury Diana, minimize her legacy, pretend she never happened. The choker's absence fit neatly into that story. But the evidence from Camilla's jewelry practices suggests something more complicated. The institution is evolving, becoming more fluid, less rigid about who wears what, when. The problem is that none of this affects the sapphire choker. Charles and Camilla can redistribute crown jewels and personal pieces all they want. They cannot redistribute something they don't own. The choker's fate rests entirely in the hands of Diana's sons. The old system, Elizabeth's exclusive assignment protocol, created conditions where things could stay hidden for decades. The lover's knot tiara proved that. The Greville tiara proved that. Countless other pieces proved that. 18 years in limbo. 3 years in limbo. Decades of gorgeous jewelry sitting in darkness because nobody wanted to deal with the emotional weight of reassignment. But the choker's absence has a different explanation entirely. It's not frozen by institutional bureaucracy. It's held by 2 men who inherited it from their mother when they were children, who have carried it through complicated grief and complicated family dynamics, and who get to decide, on their own timeline, for their own reasons, whether anyone else ever wears it again. Maybe someday the choker will reappear. The new generation clearly wants to see Diana honored in visible, meaningful ways. Kate's consistent use of other pieces proves that. Camilla's quiet redistribution of previously frozen jewelry suggests the palace itself is more open to circulation than it used to be. The rigid systems that kept things locked away are softening. Maybe as time passes and grief transforms into something more bearable, the emotional weight of this particular piece will shift too. Maybe Princess Charlotte will someday inherit it. Maybe she'll wear it to her own state events, decades from now, and people will marvel at seeing Diana's armor on a new generation. Maybe the old gatekeeping, both institutional and personal, will eventually ease enough that the choker can return to public life. But if and when that happens, it won't be because of conspiracy theorists on Reddit demanding it. It won't be because palace protocols changed or tabloids applied enough pressure. It'll be because 2 boys who lost their mother decided they were ready. William was 15. Harry was 12. They've carried this piece and everything it represents for most of their lives. They've watched people analyze their mother's jewelry, her clothes, her hair, her body language, her choices, her mistakes, her pain. They've seen that sapphire choker described as armor, as rebellion, as a symbol of everything Diana fought for and against. And they've kept it private. Maybe that's the tribute. Maybe keeping their mother's armor out of the spotlight, away from the endless analysis, the comparisons, the commodification, is exactly how they want to honor her. Maybe they look at that choker and see something nobody else can see. Their mother getting dressed for an event, adjusting the clasp, checking her reflection, preparing to walk into a room full of people who were waiting to judge her. Maybe they're not ready to share that. And that's nobody's decision to make, but theirs. Subscribe for more stories like this.